I don't know the secrets of acting at all. The only secret I know is the suit. You can have emotion, you find emotion, you experience emotion, you react, but don't act the emotion, because that's not real life. If you have the stories, and some of the best stories about the crossing of cultural boundaries. I don't have a particular role that I single out as something I want to do. I quite like the random aspect of my job. You know, I like being surprised. We are inherently unique, so I think the more authentic you are to yourself.
It's a great pleasure and an honor to meet you and to have this talk with you and to pick your brain to find out the secret of your acting, the art of acting. You have played many British gentlemen. Is there a secret to British gentleman type in terms of gestures, the way of speaking, mannerism, etc.?
I don't know the secrets of acting at all. The only secret I know is the suit. It does most of the work, really.
And hairstyle.
Hair, suit. The idea of a gentleman, I think, as far as it means anything, is quite superficial. I'm not saying that there aren't profound qualities which are to do with grace, dignity, if that's what we mean. And those are not specific to the English. I think that the archetype we're talking about, and often it's used in the roles I play just for comedy, because it's to do with comedy deals in archetypes or stereotypes.
I talk proper like a My Fair Lady.
Don't be absurd. Being a gentleman has nothing to do with one's accent. It's about being at ease in one's own skin. As Hemingway said, there is nothing noble in being superior to your fellow man. True nobility is being superior to your former self.
We know that British actors tend to be very well educated. They graduate from places like Oxford and Cambridge, and they are immersed in great literature. And part of that is reflected in your repertory. Take you, for example. You have starred in many roles, many movies and television adaptations that are from great British literature, from Pride and Prejudice to The Importance of Being Earnest. How important is that legacy to you as an actor?
I can only speak for myself. It is important to me. It's not true of all British actors, obviously. Not everybody, there are some real artists of cinema in the UK who are not expressing the works of literature, you know, whose work is probably more reflective of the current events in the world today. They're not expressing the world of education and literature. And I think some of the most important cinema coming out of the UK or of anywhere is that cinema. But I happened to grow up in a house full of books. My parents are academics. I did not go to Oxford or Cambridge. I went to a drama school. My father did go to Cambridge, so I inherited a kind of ethos. And so I've always had a great curiosity about literary fiction and a great love of language. I love what it can do to the imagination, and I love what it can do to one's language. And one of the great things I value about my own country is the language. I think it has a beauty and precision and sense of irony, tremendous nuance. I don't speak enough other languages to compare it to anything, but that is something I celebrate about my own. And if you talk about it, Shakespeare is an obvious example. It enhances the imagination. A stupid person can play Hamlet and enhance their intelligence in the process, because the thought process is so electric and so alive that your mind grows as long as you engage with it. And actually, you know, Jane Austen is not Shakespeare, but the elegance of her prose, I don't know how easy it is to translate it into any other language, but the subtlety a nuance of her prose has a very similar effect. And so it was exhilarating to me to engage with the words.
Talking about language, let's start from your award-winning movie, The King's Speech. Because in that story, language, or speech rather, is figured so importantly. That person, he's the king, but he has a speech impairment. Do you think for a public figure, speech is that important rather than something else?
I do think it is important.
Especially in war times, I guess.
Well, it was not only wartime, but yes, exactly, because he had to speak to the country at a time of a grave crisis. But he also was in the worst possible moment in history for a person who is afraid to speak. People thought he was stupid, which he was not. You know, you only have to have any recording of you know, what he wrote, his letters, his comments. This was a very intelligent man. So he was misjudged. And suddenly he was thrown into this position of responsibility, which was all dependent on his ability to express himself. I don't think we appreciate, even those of us who don't have to speak publicly, I think we sometimes underestimate how debilitating it is if you can't use your voice.
Did you feel the kind of pressure or responsibility to recreate everything as it was to portray this character? Or did you feel that you had more freedom?
More freedom. I think it's generally, I mean, different actors will probably have a different view of this. For me, it is far more important to get to the truth of the nature of an experience than it is to provide a perfect imitation of something. I was allowed some freedom because my character, although you know he was the King of England and was known, he wasn't as universally recognizable as, say, Winston Churchill or Kennedy. You know, anybody in the world would recognize the Churchill silhouette, you know, in a dark light. George VI did not have that kind of recognition to today's generation. So it was possible for me to have some freedom to personalize it, and I thought it's far more important to convey the terror of these silences that were imposed upon him by his own difficulties, and his dignity and his sense of humor, to make them in a way that I understood, you know, to be effective, rather than trying to copy a voice. I did listen to his speeches, but rather than try to sound exactly like him, I tried to sense what he felt. I could hear the difficulties.
I want to go one step further. How did you balance the dignity with the humanness?
Well, for a start, I wasn't working alone. You know, I was working with an extremely astute director and actors like Geoffrey Rush and Helena Bonham Carter. And these are things that you find together. You know, we had quite a lot of rehearsal. And the director, Tom Hooper, was worried about the things you're talking about. He thought, you know, this speech difficulty has to be very extreme, or there will be no jeopardy. We won't understand the stakes. But if it's too extreme, it will alienate the audience. Because one of the problems is that it is very uncomfortable to see somebody struggling like this. You don't want people to leave the theater. And then, unfortunately, stammering has been used for comedy through the years. And this has caused a lot of pain to people who suffer from this in real life. And so these were all traps that had to be avoided. And so I think it was up to me to be as to be as authentic as possible, to really try to love this man, and not to judge anything, to understand his vulnerability, but also to give him as much dignity. I mean, but there's a key thing here which was emphasized in this particular job. I was told at drama school, never. This may sound strange, to tell an actor, never play the emotion.
To be aloof?
No, doesn't mean that. You can have emotion, you find emotion, you experience emotion, you react, but don't act the emotion, because that's not real life.
Shortly before the King's Speech, there was A Single Man. That movie may not have been watched by a lot of people here in China, but it was a huge critical success, at least in English-speaking countries. And you portrayed a gay professor stationed in Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken. What drew you to that part? Because it sounds like so far from the typical roles that you play.
I opened my email one morning and I found an email which said Tom Ford.
A fashion designer. Yeah. Who had never made a movie before that.
Never
right?
made a movie.
Yeah.
So I was very surprised. I didn't know he had my email address. And he was just writing saying, I want to make this film. It's based on a novel by Christopher Isherwood. And I thought, it's very strange. I had met Tom Ford, but I had no idea he intended to make a movie. And I thought it just seemed so unlikely and so strange and so interesting. I didn't know really much about him, even as a designer. I don't know very much about fashion. But I thought, I have to meet him. And I met him, and he was very, very interesting and magnetic, to talk to. But it was a very busy time for me. I initially was going to say no, because I was exhausted from another.
I'm surprised. I was surprised you said yes.
I said yes, actually, on an impulse, because it felt like an adventure.
Carlos.
What did you say?
Carlos. You asked me my name.
Just a sense of going into the unknown. One of my favorite quotes is from Miles Davis, who said, "Don't play what you know, play what you don't know."
And the result was satisfying to you, I guess.
It was profoundly satisfying. I think you are asking about roles which stay with you. That, more than anything else I've ever done in my life, has stayed with me.
Was there also an element of imitation? Because, it's a gay role, and there's almost a tradition for straight actors to learn the mannerisms of typical, it's probably politically incorrect, typical gay mannerisms. And some of that, especially in comedy, is very common, but that's not a comedy. And your performance was very restrained, and it was quietly moving. There was no mannerism in that, yet people could sense that his sexual orientation and other facets of his career and his life.
I never thought about it at all. It didn't matter. It was a love story, a story about grief, about solitude, about isolation. His partner happened to be a man. It had no other relevance really at all. Tom Ford, as a gay man, didn't care much about that aspect. He said, and I was sitting next to Tom at a press conference where he said, his sexuality is no secret. If he was asked to say 10 things about himself, the fact that he was gay may be number 8. He would say, I'm from Texas, I am a fashion designer, I love movies, so it wasn't the predominantly important facet of the character, and there was no need to be effete or camp or any of those kind of stereotypes. And if you meet Tom Ford, he doesn't have any of those qualities himself. So, and I know a lot of heterosexual men who are very camp in their feet as well. So.
Okay. Commercially, your most successful movie so far has been Kingsman: The Secret Service. It has garnered, 480 million yuan here in China, $14 million worldwide. I'm wondering, when you first received that script, did it sound like another James Bond movie to you? Because at the time when even Daniel Craig was trying to reinvent the James Bond, here's another James Bond. Was that a challenge for you to either to throw it away, or another James Bond, or to make it, to infuse new life into a new venture?
No, it did not feel like a James Bond. I met Matthew Vaughn about a year and a half before we started shooting, and he hadn't finished writing the script yet. And I knew from talking to him that he wasn't trying to make James Bond. He was using James Bond. We have to remember, Kingsman is a comedy. Yes. Kingsman is it has a satirical, comic book, very self-aware sensibility. I understood that with Matthew Vaughn. Even the fact that he approached me, he said, "I want you to play this role because not because you're right for it, but because you are the last person in the world anybody is going to imagine." Killing all these people.
Was that a compliment?
Probably not. But he said, this character must be a cold steel killer, but it should surprise people. He wanted to reference a very traditional idea, exactly the stereotypes you're talking about, conscious that they're stereotypes. Again, it's comedy. So
and make fun of it at the same time.
But also celebrate it. This is where it's quite sophisticated, because in the way that I think he's paying homage to a lot of these things as well as satirizing them. So he's not trying to demolish the mythology. Everything from the Sean Connery era Bond through Michael Caine's Harry Palmer movies, or the Avengers, perhaps, or even all the way to Austin Powers. I mean, the spy genre, from Le Carré through to Austin Powers, or Jason Bourne, is very broad. But he wanted to give it, to reference a kind of something we would recognize from another era of the gentleman spy, and to contrast this kind of decorum and elegance with the outrageousness and the craziness which is possible through the world of comic book, which means that you can be much, much larger than life. So I knew that we were doing something which had a kind of a popular culture self-awareness.
Let's talk about Mr. Darcy. I don't know how many of you have seen that version of Pride and Prejudice, which was aired on CCTV here in China in the mid-1990s, and has been available online in both the dubbed version and the subtitled version. And it has been held by a lot of people in China, as people in the rest of the world, as the best Pride and Prejudice adaptation of all those wonderful adaptations. The thing that's most memorable to me is that gaze, the Darcy gaze. Did you practice that? Did you design it? No. I know women here will have different perspectives, but I just watched it last week for the second time, and I still believe that it's worth recommending to everyone who loves great TV and great literature.
You should say something about the dance, perhaps. I might remark on the number of couples.
You talk by rule, then, when you're dancing?
Yes, sometimes it is best. Then we may enjoy the advantage of saying as little as possible.
It's wonderful that it's lasted so long. I mean, we filmed it more than 20 years ago now. And the fact that people still watch it and talk about it is not something I would have expected to happen ever in my career. So to do something that has that durability is extraordinary. As I told you before we came out, I haven't seen it for 20 years. So I can't really judge.
Have you been avoiding it deliberately?
No, I just, you know, there has never been a moment where I think, what shall I do today? I'll spend 6 hours watching myself in Pride and Prejudice. I may get round to it at some point, but it just hasn't happened. I'd be quite curious to go and look and see what the fuss is about, because at the time it was just another job, you know, for television.
Yeah, I heard you turned it down the first time it was offered to you.
Yes, I thought I was the worst possible choice. It was a time in British television where the costume drama, the period costume drama, had somewhat gone out of vogue. But what happened, as I remember it, was that the previous year the BBC did a production of Middlemarch, George Eliot's Middlemarch, which was a great success and very, very good. And suddenly I think there was a moment where people thought that it's back, we can do this now, you know. But also there was a pressure. I thought, you know, that may be the one that worked, and don't try the same trick twice. And when they offered me Darcy, I thought, you can't play him. You know, he works in the book, but how do you inhabit this character? Because he doesn't do anything. He doesn't speak really much.
He gazes.
He stares at people, but I mean, you know, he stares out of the window. He stares at Elizabeth Bennet, and he looks forbidding. But that's going to be boring. I mean, you know, and I don't know what to do, because I don't think I look like the guy. I don't think I am like the guy, and I'm not. You know, he's a very contained. Everything everyone thinks I am now, I'm not. I talk more than he does. I'm more animated than he is, and I thought, this guy who stands very still and is very silently, I don't know how to transform into that and be interesting.
After putting your stamp of authority on Mr. Darcy, do you have more interest to play other roles that, you know, from great literature that have been played by other people? Hamlet, for example?
I'm a bit old for Hamlet.
Oh, actually, I think Cumberbatch is also too old to play Hamlet.
No, he's all right. I think Hamlet is quite flexible, but I am too old. I played him as a drama student, and it was the beginning of my career in a way, because it was because of Hamlet that I got seen by agents and casting people, and then so it led me to work immediately. And so I had it was only a student production, but I had a very exhilarating experience with it, and I would love to have done it again. It's a pity in a way that moment passed. Again, it's to do with engagement with language. I don't have a particular role that I single out as something I want to do. I quite like the random aspect of my job. You know, I like being surprised.
You and Hugh Grant played rivals in Bridget Jones. And in real life, I read somewhere in some reports that sometimes you were considered for the same role. And now that I think of it, there are many British actors seem to fit the British gentleman type perfectly. How do you differentiate yourself from the pack, so to speak?
I don't think it's something you can decide about. I think if you're successful as an actor, or probably in any area of performance or any area of creativity, your originality just happens to be to do with your own personality, because, you know, we are inherently unique. So I think the more authentic you are to yourself, the more likely you are to have your own specific qualities and nuances.
There have been a lot of US-UK co-productions all along, and to a Chinese eye, it is sometimes difficult to tell which is a British film or which is an American film, because the talents from both sides of the Atlantic Ocean often work together. And we've seen, say, British actors playing American roles with astounding degrees of success, and vice versa. Have there been cases that you noticed, say, an American actor doing things that are not authentic?
I wouldn't tell you here. Yes, I have. Absolutely, I've seen it.
The reason I asked you about US-UK co-productions is because I wanted to know your take on possible UK-Chinese co-productions. Our two cultures, of course, have a wider gap. We have different languages and different customs. Theoretically, is it possible for our two countries to make movies that can appeal to both markets?
Absolutely, it has to be. I mean, we're going to see The Great Wall soon, so that'll be an interesting test case. If you have the stories, and some of the best stories are about the crossing of cultural boundaries.